BookStew viewers and listeners. I am doing a juggling act for you today, and let's just hope I don't drop anything. This is my first Zoom from in the studio, and my first time with two authors on a Zoom. So I'm hoping that technically everything will be smooth, and I just want to explain to you why I have two authors on the show. So, quite a long while ago, I mean, the book was published in 2014, I read a book called Till the Well Runs Dry by Lauren Francis-Sharma. And in my review, I wrote, the novel is suffused with the everyday Trinidadian routine of food, friends, magic and spells, the ocean and backwoods hamlets. I'm hoping that many more books will be forthcoming as we learn of the beauty and hardship behind the cruise ship facade of Trinidad. So that book came out and I really loved it. And then years later, and in fact, this past year, the plague year, Lauren came out with another book. And this book was called The Book of Little Acts. And the book went back and forth between Trinidad and the American West. And it was so monumental that, as I mentioned to Lauren, after I finished it, I didn't even put it down. I started from the beginning again and reread it a second time. And the only other book I've ever done that for is Larry McMurtry's Lonesome Dove. And maybe there was the West was in common, the American West, but Larry McMurtry certainly never had anything about Trinidad in it. And then I received a notification about a new book from a Trinidadian author named Celeste Mohammed. And I just, Trinidad just, the Trinidad connection rang something in my head. And I sent Celeste a total fangirl, text or whatever. Hello, I just read your fine essay about Dougla in the Millions, which is a website, and Dougla is Caribbean Hindustani because people from India did migrate, not always voluntarily, to Trinidad. And I said, I was wondering if you'd read the novel Book of the Little Acts by Lauren Francis-Sharma. It deals with a Trinidadian woman who comes to the U.S. in the 1830s and becomes involved with men of the Crow tribe who also have black parents and grandparents. I'm asking because I have a TV show and I liked her book so much that I was going to invite her to be my guest, but I thought it'd be fascinating to have you both on the show, and I'd also be very pleased to promote your upcoming book, Pleasant View. So Celeste said yes, Lauren said yes, and that was a long story, but now I'm going to introduce you to them both, and then I'm going to step back and we're just going to listen in on two wonderful writers speaking about their books and speaking about their homeland, Trinidad. So, Lauren, Celeste, welcome to BookStew. After it seems like now I've taken up half the show and I'm going to give you the other half. But I just want to put one more thing in here. I was reading a little Calypsonian song in my research, and it goes, if they're sending Indians to India and Africans back to Africa, well, somebody please just tell me where they sending poor me. I am neither one nor the other, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. So if they're sending all these people back home for true, they got to split me in two. So I'm going to leave off there and ask you to react to that song.
Where to begin? I'm not even sure.
Thank you, Eileen. I think the song is really reflective of both of our books, and this idea that Trinidad is a very multicultural country, a real melting pot. I like to think of it as a melting pot, more of a melting pot than even America, frankly. Might be smaller, but in terms of demographics. It is certainly a very diverse population of people. We would all be split.
Yeah, we would all be split, and that song, actually, I quoted from it in that essay that you read, Eileen, the first essay, the one about being a doula, because it really hits home very closely for me being a doula. It does hit home, and life in Trinidad is kind of about, like you said, being able to live and exist at the intersection of many cultures, many races, many religions.
So speaking of religion, since you dropped that in, Celeste, right now we're going to watch a very short clip that is kind of a dramatization of one part of one of the stories in the connected stories that make up Pleasant View. And this is the story called Loosed. And just to set it up a little bit, the characters Ruth and Declan are going to a night service at a revival church. Ruth is a believer and Declan is not. And Ruth, in fact's name used to be Michelle, but when she got religion, she changed her name to Ruth because Michelle had the word hell in it. So we're going to pause here and watch the clip.
Declan, that's what you're wearing?
Declan had known his wife would be watching in her dressing table mirror as he left the bathroom. Watching, waiting to criticize. He'd known, and yet he went ahead anyway.
So what's wrong with this?
Declan, it's a church service. What the elders and the bishop will think.
Look, in the Bible say to render your heart and not your garment.
No, it does not say that.
Listen, my clothes wouldn't matter nothing to Christ. Only as it are fake ass Christians. You understand? So I guess tonight we gonna see which kind you're really dealing with.
Today was their wedding anniversary. Ruth had asked him to go with her to night service at Pleasant View First Holiness Revival Church, a Pentecostal circus, just like the one his grandma used to drag him to as a boy. Ruth had often invited Declan to church. He'd refused every time.
Celeste, these characters, and I'm sorry that we only caught such a small glimpse of them from my favorite story, but you mentioned religion, and here's a case where religion is definitely a barrier and an interference in a couple's marriage. How do you is there such a tremendous clash of religions in Trinidad? Again, just like there are so many different types of people from so many countries, there's really a wide range of religions as well.
Yes, I wouldn't say there's a clash of religions. I would say that there are many different types of religions, and the beauty of Trinidad is that we all celebrate each other's religious holidays, if you can imagine that. So you have Muslims celebrating Christmas, you have Christians celebrating Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha. So everybody celebrates everybody's religious holidays. And I wouldn't say that there is any religious tension except around like election time and that sort of thing. Then the differences and the sort of underlying fissures and fractures kind of play up. But as far as religion is concerned, I would say that we are a lot more peaceful and harmonious place than many other places.
Certainly than this red and blue country, huh?
Yes, yes.
Lauren, in your book, which has also been nominated for a 2021 National Book Award for Fiction, congratulations. The Book of Little Acts goes back and forth between Trinidad and a Sioux tribe in the United States. How did those two seemingly disparate groups and locations come together for you?
Well, first, let me just make a correction. It was not nominated for that award. I wish.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It's the Hurston Wright Award for Fiction. I'm very sorry.
That's
maybe the National Book Award for your next book, though.
We should hope so. Yes, no. So it is it's kind of a strange story. Bringing a woman from Trinidad to the American West. But I'd run across a couple of different stories, sort of historical pieces about travels from the Caribbean to the Americas, and there was a small part of me that wondered, if in fact women were doing it, and if in fact Black women were doing it, and if everyone else was doing it, why couldn't this Black woman do it as well? And I think my huge inspiration was really to sort of insert a sort of a forgotten group of people into a history that had been written about many, many times. And I knew, Edward Rose is a real life character in my book. He is a Black Crow. And yet I'd never heard of him before. And he was, pretty famous at the time. And so I really wanted to bring these two cultures together. I wanted to show sort of the migration patterns sort of from the Caribbean to the Americas, and show the impact that both of these cultures, both of these places had on each other. So there was a lot sort of going on there. And basically I was sort of, why not? Why not? Why couldn't this happen?
Well, Celeste, so as we know in the Book of Little Acts, the Trinidadian part takes place in the 1700s, and there's a family who's successful, but they're always under threat of colonial powers, new colonial powers, coming in and seizing land and ruining their lives. When you were growing up in Trinidad, how was your history taught? Was it, how is the colonial part of the history, which is so important and kind of so miserable, how did they deal with that in school?
Yes, well, I am a history buff. I always have been. I love history. And, in high school, you get to select what you want to do for your school leaving exams called CXE. And the A-level. We do English. We used to do, in my day, English exams in order to leave school. So both times I opted to study history, West Indian history, and European history. And I would say that they did cover, a wide range of topics. I don't think any effort was really made to hide the horror of what occurred. We did learn about, the encomienda system, how the indigenous Indians were treated. We learned about slavery, we learned about indentureship, we learned all of those things. But I would say one of the things I value about Lauren's book is that until I sat down and started reading it, I never put a face. I never put real people to the dates. You know what I mean? So I know all the history, I know it very well, and I know all the dates and all of that, but it was a joy to read her book and to see those dates and those words, capitulation, and all the things that I know in my head actually personified. And to think about it differently, like, there were real people. There were real people dealing with these issues, I never really thought about that before.
Wow, that's a tribute to your research, Lauren, which you did 4 years of. I guess the fact that you chose a woman to go back and forth, even though she certainly had assistance from a guide who was a very endearing character, she had to really defy her father And I know that in Pleasant View, there's definitely, it's very problematical, it seems, being a woman in Trinidad. There is a certain level of paternalism and misogyny that's everywhere, but it seemed particularly harsh in Pleasant View and also in parts of Little Axe. How did you both feel about that? I mean, obviously nobody says, "Oh yeah, I love being oppressed," but within the context of Trinidad itself, what are your thoughts about that?
Lauren, you want to go?
Oh, go ahead. You can go first. It's fine.
Okay. When people react to Pleasant View and they say these things, it's absolutely correct. But the truth is, while I was writing the book, I never really thought that I didn't think in those terms that I am going to demonstrate misogyny or patriarchy. I didn't think of that. All I did was I was trying to portray life as it really exists for many, many women that I know. Personally, a number of the stories were inspired by women, friends, and acquaintances sharing their stories with me. So that was my concern, really just being as authentic and realistic as possible. And in retrospect, I can see why people would say, "Whoa, so much misogyny and so much." But at the time, it didn't really feature in my mind that I was going to write a book highlighting that aspect of Trinidad culture.
One of the things I loved about Celeste's book was that despite the sort of, oppression and down and outness of some of the characters, there's a lot of agency, Celeste, in your stories. People are just trying to find their way out, trying to make their lives better. And I really appreciated that. I mean, for me, when I'm writing about sort of the oppression of women, misogyny, I'm actually writing about what's still happening today, right? I mean, in every country, including the one that I'm calling in from now, there is. I mean, if you think about what's happening in Texas, right, and just the enormous amount of sort of legislative work that goes into oppressing women is disheartening, I think. And the work that we're putting in, the stories that we're telling about women are, even though my book is set in the 1700s and the early 1800s, it's not that far off from what could happen today in many communities. And I, as I was reading Celeste's book, I was thinking, here we go again, right?
Well, if I could respond to that, I would say that I felt that if someone were to read your book and then immediately afterwards read my book, I think it would deepen the understanding of my book to see that from the inception, if you will, there's certain aspects of Trinidad culture that remain and that we almost could not avoid given the start that we had.
I was wondering, sorry, Eileen, I was just going to ask Celeste one question. Is that okay?
Oh, absolutely.
I was wondering, Celeste, what you think about sort of the colonial history and the unusual sort of immigration and emigration patterns in Trinidad, and how that sort of reflected on your book and it contributed maybe to the discontent of the characters in your book.
Yes. I think we have to admit that Trinidad is a nation, because of where it's geographically placed, as you mentioned in your book. It was inevitable, if you will, that we would be fought over by so many, by all the colonial powers, right? But it was also inevitable that they would treat Trinidad as more like a stepping stone. Everybody would just kind of step here to get to somewhere else. You know what I mean? And I feel like that has continued. There are many people, even people who are born here, who live here now, who do not regard Trinidad as a permanent place. We Trinidadians are people always on the move, at least up here, and always looking for either You have some people always talking about going back to the motherland, wanting to go to India, wanting to go to Africa and reconnect. And then you have people always thinking about going to England, going to America, going to Canada. Everybody in Trinidad is in some way not fully here. If you know what I mean, right?
Yeah.
So migration, immigration, emigration. And I love what you said earlier. We think of this region, this Western Hemisphere, as, you know, broken up into countries, but really and truly, there has always been a sort of migration up from, what's it called, Tierra del Fuego, whatever, Argentina, up. And when you reach the top of South America, there are only two places you could go, and Trinidad is the first one, or you can go that way to Panama. So there's always been this movement, and it doesn't stop at Florida. You know what I mean? We've always been flowing in that direction and back, really. So it was great that you decided to acknowledge that. And I don't think I had ever seen American popular culture acknowledge that flow until maybe Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton is supposed to be, he was from the Caribbean.
Yeah.
One of the founding fathers, right?
Yeah.
And you never really heard that much until, well, of course, lately. And so we have been feeding into American life and politics and culture for a long time. But I guess now it's being acknowledged a little bit.
I'm just going to pop in for a minute, sorry, Lauren, about Trinidad itself. So when you look at Trinidad on a map, it's really the furthest island in the Caribbean from the United States, and it's very close to Venezuela. And I think that there's the Caribbean where, you know, you hop on JetBlue and you're in the Cayman Islands in what seems like 10 minutes. And then there's Trinidad and Tobago, which require more of an effort to travel to, and where most people don't know that you have oil in Trinidad. And so, and that came as a revelation to me. And then, of course, there's massive political upheaval in Venezuela going on now. So do you think, how does the oil impact the culture?
Oh, I think the oil is responsible in large part for modern Trinidadian culture being what it is. Fun fact, the first oil, I think, was really extracted and used or whatever by an American company. I think it was like Americans who were really responsible for starting the oil industry in Trinidad about 100 years ago or so. But for a long time, oil and the oil industry remained in the hands of foreigners. But I would say in the latter half of the 20th century, we, the people, you know, we took control of those resources and we started to benefit from them directly. And something changed in Trinidad society forever. Being oil rich, as you know, in other places, you've heard it said, it's a curse in some ways. Because the thought was at the time, well, now it's our money. And now we don't have to do the things that our forefathers did. Now we can relax. Now we can spend more. Now we can be more, you know, conspicuous in our consumption. Now we can give away to the entire Caribbean. And so there was a sort of laissez-faire kind of approach that came into Trinidad culture that hasn't gone away. So like when I was a little child, the oil boom happened in the 70s, whatever, and then there was this slump. And it was such a shock. It was a shock, yes. And it was part of the reason why so many people started leaving to go to other places, America. And so because we just never thought that oil would betray us, you know. And then there came another boom, but in gas, you know, natural gas. They found natural gas and stuff here. And we went into that same boom mentality. Money could never finish, you know, and stuff. And then now we're in a slump again. So it sort of defines that culture of being very flashy and very conspicuous in our consumption, but then having these periods of just crashing and everybody running like rats from a ship.
Well, I'm sorry to say we're running out of time, but Lauren, I'd like to give you the last thoughts on this wonderful conversation, and I'm so happy that you both joined me, and I'm so happy that you enjoyed and appreciated each other's books. Lauren, anything from you?
No, I'm really happy to chat with Celeste. I would say in the last point that she was making that I think oil also contributes to Trinidad not being reliant on tourism, right? And this and it creates a completely different experience when you come to Trinidad. I mean, it is not a country that that is dependent on Americans to visit or Europeans to visit, and as such, doesn't have that service culture as many other Caribbean islands do. And so, so if you're visiting, you're not very special because every Trinidadian thinks that they're special. Yes. Well, there is a lot of pride in being Trinidadian.
Well, from speaking to the two of you, I know how special you two are, and you're special to me, and I want to thank you again so much for joining me today and hopefully revealing about Trinidad what Americans would never know if it wasn't for your fantastic books. So thank you both so much. And BookStew viewers, and listeners, I wanted to tell you about my next show, which it will be the December show, since this is a November show. The book is Dava Shastri's Last Day, and it's a novel by Kirthnana Ramasetti, who sounds like she's Indian, so that should be a good one. So I hope you enjoyed this show and my little Zoom experiment which had such fantastic results. So keep watching and good night.